The panel has the title Human Enhancement. So if we look at all possible enhancements and focus now on moral enhancement, there is something curious about moral enhancement because all other enhancements can be brought into question because of moral reasons. Radical life extension, some cognitive enhancements. There are possible moral reasons to bring it in doubt. But moral enhancement, by its very idea, is always morally justified, provided that it is safe. Okay, we can ask what is safe, but let us say that it is reasonably safe, or that the person undergoing the moral enhancement considers it morally safe. We're not thinking about egalitarian distribution of moral enhancement and so on, but moral enhancement in principle. So what can possibly be wrong with moral enhancement, even by medical means, if it is safe and if we disregard all these other possibilities? Is there any reason why we can say, okay, moral enhancement can be morally wrong in principle? Thank you.
You want to take that one, Massimo?
Yeah, thank you. Well, one standard reply to that is the age-long discussion concerning freedom that was started by John Harris in 2011, perhaps. And the point is that it may be morally objectionable to promote moral enhancement, provided that we can say, and of course this is also a question to be discussed, whether we can say that enhancing people by biomedical means, of course, because we should always remember that there is moral enhancement or moral progress, and then there is moral bio-enhancement, which acts on the neural basis of moral judgment and choice. So, provided that we act on this, it might be that we sort of take away the liberty or autonomy of people to decide by themselves, as famously said by John Harris through a quotation of Milton: we take away the freedom to fall. That is the fact of standing, that is not falling. It has to do with the original sin in Milton's poem, and the fact of standing has no merit. Therefore, it's not intrinsically valuable if you don't have the possibility to do otherwise, so to say. Now, this is all very controversial, of course, because one may say, no, there is no such thing as libertarian free will, and therefore determinism is true, and perhaps you have compatibilist account of free will, and therefore this is compatible with determinism, and therefore perhaps this objection doesn't stand. So everything is philosophically controversial, but this is a typical claim that can be raised against moral enhancement. Of course, it's not the only one. The other one has to do with the possibility of coercion, that is the fact that you are, as some people have envisaged, that you need a very wide process of moral enhancement that is somehow imposed on people. But of course, this is not necessarily so. I mean, people may simply choose to enhance themselves, and in that case, this problem with coercion is not a problem really, and therefore then there is the last thing I say. Provided that we can act on the neural basis of moral cognition, so to say. and provided that, for example, we promote better behavior by fighting against certain antisocial dispositions or attitudes or emotions or whatever. It is not. We can do such thing by assuming a certain kind of behavior, which we a priori, so to say, decide that it's the desirable one. So that if we have to embark on a very large program, for example, as many people have suggested, for example, through gene editing, we should have a prior account of what it is to be morally good or morally acceptable. This might have an undesired consequence in that you perhaps will end up in having people who are much more similar, morally speaking, that is, cultivate very similar ideals, so that you have a sort of account of what it is to be a good person, or what it is good behavior, and you try to produce those kind of persons. This might have some unwanted, undesirable effects in that it might reduce pluralism. Of course, you may say, yes, it also reduces bad people and bad behavior, and that therefore is a good thing. Okay, but the other element is that it might produce less differentiation in moral outlooks of people. This eventually has to do also with probably the normative account that you presuppose. If you presuppose some sort of consequentialist account according to which all that matters are consequences, for example, the reduction of violence, the reduction of harm, the increase of well-being, well, that might be perfectly acceptable, but perhaps it is not the case that everyone accepts some consequentialist account according to which these are all the values that matter, and if you accept a different account in which, for example, autonomy or respecting individuals' rights to give shape to their life are particularly important, and perhaps you can even accept some bad consequences in terms of well-being for other people, but you you put priority on this value of autonomy, and therefore you have different conclusions concerning whether the project is or is not acceptable.
I don't want to abuse my privileges as the moderator, but just a quick follow-up, if I may. So you're on the question of what normative conception you assume, and correct me if any of this is wrong, but you've written defending a version of the objective list theory of well-being, that there are certain goods that objectively determine whether someone has a life filled with flourishing, like health. And so I'm curious how you would square that with your point about being cautious about enhancements that bypass rational agency. So what if there was some enhancement that bypassed rational agency in the way that you were expanding upon, but it led to objective goods like health that the objective list theory of well-being would say is crucial for flourishing? Would it be justified in that case?
Sorry, I didn't get the point. You are saying that there is inconsistency between this discussion on considering rational agency and accepting the objectivist account?
No, I'm not necessarily accusing you of inconsistency. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. In prepping for this, I was reading the article where you defend the objective list theory of well-being, and I was thinking, what happens if you have an enhancement that bypasses your rational agency but leads to those objective goods? Like, how would you analyze that?
Okay, I see that. Well, my point in that article was, for example, defending the view that autonomy is an objective good in life, And this is perfectly in line with the idea, with the problem of the moral agency argument against moral enhancement, because, for example, the idea is that provided that you, for example, enhance my capacities, my moral behavior, my capacity to produce good consequences in consequentialist terms, but you take away some degree of autonomy or perhaps entirely my capacity to make autonomous decisions, then you're perhaps doing something good for other people, in that I will not be violent or what, but you're doing something bad for my well-being, because provided that autonomy is one of the goods, the objective goods that promote well-being, you're taking away autonomy. So autonomy as a central element, and also is connected also to another element, which is achievement, which is typically one of the elements in the list. Achievement is the fact that you have the capacity and the opportunity to achieve some projects of yours. And this is also tied, of course, to autonomy, and therefore, if you select a priori, I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but if you select a priori the sort of person that I will be, and you might affect in some way the sort of projects that I may want to pursue, and therefore also you attack in some way the objective good of achievement.
I think, and actually I want to go to Lílian. I do think that this issue of the fuzzy area is very important, and I often use the example of breast reconstruction after breast removal. And it's like this: you do not need breasts, so it's not a medical therapy, right? Right, it's a psychological therapy, and so if someone says, and the similar argument has been made about the use of gender-affirming therapies in general, that if it's a psychological therapy that we're providing to people, maybe, and it's being provided by a universal healthcare system, isn't it in also the same logic to say that, well, if I feel that I need sex reassignment, that would also be an affirmative therapy. Anyway, and I think one of the things I'm puzzled by the Catholic approach to the doctrine of the body is the kind of inviolability of the body that is asserted. The inviolability of reproductive process, the way that children should be made, and so forth. And I contrast that with other doctrines like Arianism. When we were at Saluzzo Castle yesterday, when George whacked his head pretty hard because he's so much taller than medieval people used to be, another example of enhancement. One of the pictures that we saw was a guy who was arguing against the heresy of Arianism. And this ancient doctrine of Arianism argued that, yes, we're children of God, but God intends us to grow up and become more like God. It was a kind of early theotic aspiration, not like the Eastern Orthodox theosis, but the idea that part of spirituality is to grow. And so I wonder if you have seen within the Catholic appropriation of these ideas the notion that some forms of enhancement, for instance, moral enhancement, could be part of a spiritual process of growth that, in fact, if we were able to suppress, for instance, addictions, sex addictions, or substance abuse addictions, that would be a form of moral enhancement that would support our spiritual growth. And that's the kind of argument that I make within a Buddhist context as well.
Thank you. I feel there are lots of questions inside the questions. Let me see. Lots of women will disagree with you about the breasts needed or not. You still have vision with only one eye, and people would argue you need two, right? There are some organs we might not see the neediness for it straight away, and still they are part of us, so we feel we need to be complete. We need to be whole, we need them back. And then the second part is also real. The psychological needs are needs. No? So when you use technology to achieve them in a, let's say, rational, proportional way, I don't think it's a bad use of technology. Of course, need to see if the individual is sane and the psychology is aligned with real goods or not just perceived goods, but then doing them some harm, no? the person some harm in that part. And then in the kind of second part of your question about enhancement and natural growth, maybe, I guess my opinion is there should be more alignment than the current one in religious circles. In the sense, they believe that God created the world and intelligent beings in the world also implies the possibility to grow, no? And this growth is spiritual, is intellectual. You can even argue that the natural selection process is part of a plan, no? Or a plan of the creation, so it should be more natural than it seems. I get it's also part of a traditional institution with a long history. To be scared of some applications of technology, and then as a result or some kind of response that could be extreme caution, don't use it, be careful not to change what's given. But when you look carefully in history, and even in Catholic history, the hospitals in Europe, no, they were born within the church, very aligned to the church, with religious people helping. And not to go back to the medieval age, Gregor Mendel was an Augustinian monk discovering the modern genetics, the rules of modern genetics. Was talking to Paul earlier before we started the conference, and I visited the Francis Crick Institute in London for the International Summit on Human Genome Editing in 2023. In a tour of the building, very modern building, there was a portrait, a painting of Mendel with the bees and the experimentation. And the person giving the tour said, there were a lot of discussion about leaving this painting here because people find it too religious. Exactly, I laughed. You can't cancel history just because he was religious, or maybe exactly because he was religious and one of the studied people at the time, and one of the people believing that there were laws within creation and that things could be discovered and studied and brought forward, no, in our intellect, and that our intelligence can bring us, yes, forward and advance. This kind of set of beliefs for these anthropologists, ideas and values was exactly what made him study and discover, study for decades, publish, and then discover what we kind of take for granted today in genetics, right? So I do see with serious and honest people, a lot of alignment between science and faith, kind of harmony more than people that even find inspiration in religions when doing science or discovering things or wanting to bring innovation for the good of society. It's kind of a form of charity in practice, intellectual charity. And that's the way I see. So I find both groups, but I see that the ones trying to bring this knowledge forward, of course, for a real good, not an imaginary good, but a real good of the individual in society, are very aligned to what religion proposes.
If I may try to link this, I think many people have this idea that maybe enhancement might not produce something authentic. Typically, people want authentic spiritual growth, not just that you take a pill and think that you're now spiritual advanced. There is this problem about when does an enhancement produce something good in the appropriate way. And it's not just the instrumental aspect, it's also that it's anchored in the right way. If I learn how to play the piano by training myself, now my piano playing is going to be expressing me. It's going to be very strongly linked to me as a person. If I could just download the skill, like in the Matrix movie, it might very well be that I produce decent music, but it's presumably not going to be me. Although that might depend quite a lot on the practical implementation of how you actually download a skill in my brain. And it might very well be that the right way of implementing that technically in some time in the future is going to mean that I'm going to be playing piano in a way that's linked to me. That's a kind of empirical, practical question. But there is still this doubt we often have that enhancement might provide a shortcut that doesn't make it authentic. That is, I think, the main reason many people are worried about moral enhancement, because they imagine that now you're just downloading a moral code, or you're beefing up some kind of moral co-processor in your frontal lobe, so you're thinking through the game theory and the ethics very well, but it's not really you. But in many practical cases that might be right. After all, using a pocket calculator to do accurate and fast calculations is appropriate as long as you know when it's appropriate to use. The problem is often that as enhancements are talked about in theory, we're using this high construal level, we're using big principles against them. But it's very different when there is a pill there on the table, when it's an actual practice where you actually see not just the good sides and bad sides, but also the awkward sides and the practicalities about actually using it, like Ozempic. Ozempic seems to not just reduce obesity, but it might also reduce wanting of various kinds, which from, of course, many philosophical perspectives is seen as very good, except that many people say, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to do that by willpower, by meditation? Just taking a pill seems like cheating. Yet the wanting might also be causing a lot of bad stuff, so it might actually be a useful response. I think a lot of the moral discussion here about what we're trying to grasp and the best way of grasping it are in themselves extremely valuable, even if we don't do enhancement. Even that conversation about knowing what you want is actually something we gain from.
Let's give another round.